Good morning, YouTube. Thank you so much for joining me as I talk about another subject that is near and dear to my heart. And this is something that I actually mentioned in my very first video that I wanted to talk a little bit about the mental health problems in the Jehovah Witness community. This also is something that I want to qualify my ability to discuss some of the things that I'm going to talk about. As part of my journey in my education, I decided that I wanted to not just study world religion, which I did some graduate work on, but in my undergrad, I minored in journalism, and then I also had a degree in psychology. And then when I went on, I also did a graduate work in social science and psychology. So I've actually worked in the field when I first graduated from college, and I've actually written articles. So I want to kind of qualify some of the things that I'm saying because I've researched this, I've published things, and I've actually been involved in social science for a long time. So my my perspective is one of having grown up as a Jehovah Witness and having family members that were Jehovah Witnesses, and actually seeing things that are themes that I've even today seen the manifestation of this cult. And what I want to first talk about is why mental illness is a crisis in the Jehovah Witness community. You first have to understand a little bit about what types of people are drawn to dogmatic religions. And when you actually study the types of personalities that would be attracted to a cult like the Jehovah Witnesses, like Scientology, a lot of times you're going to find people that already have issues in themselves. This is not to attack any person that has a mental illness. I'm a mental health advocate because, as I've mentioned, this hits near and dear to me. My mother was mentally ill. My brothers have mental illness. And my grandfather, the one that I talked about that was the pedophile, I know he suffered from many different types of mental illness. So you have to understand what happens when you already have issues within yourself. So there's when people say mental illness, it's an umbrella term. People can be manic depressive, people can have delusions, people can be bipolar, people can be schizoaffective or defective, people can, suffer from, irrational issues for a number of different reasons. You can get treatment, and it could be a one time crisis. You've suffered a death, you've had issues at work, you've had a bout of depression that is under the mental health umbrella, but that doesn't mean that you are in a situation for the rest of your life. And that's a separate, side subject for me, is that we as Americans, because I am from the United States, I know that there are people that watch this video that are from other countries. We don't have a good understanding, and we don't have a good way of dealing with mental illness in the United States. And I think that the health insurances don't help. But because of that, there's a lot of people that instead of getting the help that they need, they handle it internally, or unfortunately, they turn to religion. And if you actually study mental health and you actually study different communities and different types of people, when people had irrational behavior, they would, say it was demons or there's something spiritual wrong. And so, again, this all is in context because what types of people are going to be attracted to a religion like the Jehovah Witness? So what happens is that, and I talked about this in another video, is that when you talk to people that have been converted and you talk to large groups of people, or you do even a small research on it, you're going to find that certain types of people get attracted to a religion like the Jehovah Witnesses. And so you're finding people that are already disenfranchised. They have issues. They don't have a close family connection. I talked about how I did research and came across how they were specifically going after African American people in the 60s and 70s because they felt that this was a disenfranchised group. This is a group of people that were feeling like they were not being validated in society, so they were going to offer them something that they didn't feel. And if you look at the amount of people that the missionaries go after in other countries and how this helps to booster the amount of numbers that are Jehovah Witnesses, you'll see that a lot of times they do go after disenfranchised groups of people and try to offer them a type of utopian existence. And this is stuff that's been documented by people that have studied the tactics of the Jehovah Witnesses. So again, if there's someone who has a mental illness, they're already having irrational thoughts, delusional thoughts, and they gravitate towards the supernatural. So again, if you study psychology and you study how people use the supernatural to explain away things that they're having issues understanding, then you'll see that this is a typical behavior of delusions. This is a typical behavior of people that already have mental illness. And it is an indication because instead of being down to earth and actually realizing there are logical ways of dealing with the things that are happening around you, or explaining things in a logical, realistic way, they're actually justifying their delusional behavior by saying God, by using the supernatural. So what made you kill a cat? God told me to do it. What made you put your child in the microwave? I had to get the demons out. So again, you'll see in a lot of ways that mental illness can manifest in supernatural. So when you're evaluating your clients, and these are things that I actually did, you will see that a lot of times there'll be themes of God. You'll see that they'll be overly almost obsessed in God. So having been associated with 5 different congregations in my 17 years, and I explain this because my parents were divorced. They lived in different areas, moved throughout their lives, and I also was associated with my grandparents' congregations. I saw a lot of mental health issues. I saw a lot of people that had mental health problems and they weren't getting the proper help for them. And here's the problem that happens in the Jehovah Witness community. So one of the things that the Jehovah Witnesses do is they reinforce the supernatural as a way to deal with whatever illnesses are happening that are not physical. So when there are problems, when they're having issues, they say, please be no part of the world. So what people do is they go to the elders. The elders are not educated. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say 95% of the time, they barely graduated from high school. they're not going to have any specialized training to deal with the types of issues that come up, because you're going to have a population of people that normally will have some type of delusional issues. And let me explain what I mean by that, because I'm not at all attacking the Jehovah Witness community. What I'm saying is that I have watched the videos that the governing body does, and it is my belief that this is a type of mass delusion. It happens a lot in groups that are cults. So in order for you to accept something that is a mass delusion, you have to take on that in yourself. So what I'm saying is that a lot of times when people are a part of a group and it's a cult, and they're asking you to do things that are not rational and not reasonable, you take on a part of that delusion. And it's only when you step outside that you're like, I can't believe I actually believe that, or I can't believe I actually went along with that. And I've talked to people in the ExJW community that talk about how they feel so much better mentally. And so that's the part that I'm referring to. So what happens is a lot of times people are having issues of depression. People are dealing with, anger or resentment or whatever they're dealing with. And their first option is to go to unqualified, uneducated elders who don't give them, the proper help. And so you have people who they don't really even think to go to a therapist, to go to get a mental health evaluation until they're, really, 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 just in their last stages of being forced to do it because they're catatonic, they won't get out of bed, they lost their job, and then they realize, I can't go to people in the Kingdom Hall. I need to actually get evaluated. And I think part of the problem is that the religion itself is so dogmatic in teaching people not to trust the world and not to look to the world for help. And this goes even just behind mental health. This is about the pedophilia. It's about the child abuse and sexual abuse that goes on, is that the people are not getting the proper help that they need when they have issues. And what happens is you have people that get depressed, you get people that are dealing with that internally and breaking down. And so when I talked about the child abuse and sexual abuse and the Jehovah Witness community, this is a part of it. Because what happens if you've been raped repeatedly and you don't have anyone that's going to support you, and you are forced to go to the Kingdom Hall because you don't want to lose at least your family and your friends? You suffer a type of depression. This isn't a condemnation for that. This is a part of the reason why mental health is a crisis in the Jehovah Witness community. If you listen to even a few videos, you will hear consistent stories of, my mother was sick, my father had mental issues, I suffered from depression, I found out after I left that I had bipolar, or my mother had bipolar, or undiagnosed issues. Why is that? Why is that a theme throughout people's journeys? Why is it? Because they're not getting the help that they need in the Kingdom Hall, because they're not being advised correctly. So that's one of the reasons that I do my videos. It's because I have seen it up close and personal, and I know the effects of it. And so I'm advocating for people to not feel, number one, diminished, defeated. Don't feel like this is a casting judgment because you are going through something. Please get the proper help. The Jehovah Witness community does not understand mental health. They should not be commenting on it. What you need to be doing is realizing that this is not a judgment against you. This is something that you actually need to do the work, and you have to go outside the community because they're not going to help you. You're not going to be supported. It's like, why would you go to an elder if you broke your arm? The elder can't help you. He's not a trained physician. So why would you go to an elder if you're having delusions, if you're having irrational thoughts, if you're feeling depressed to the point that it's affecting your life, if you feel like someone has molested you or sexually abused you? Because again, these are all things that are connected. Go to the proper resources. So I wanted to also give a little bit of anecdotal story. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that actually affected me personally. My mother was mentally ill. My mother was never treated for it. And I don't know all the reasons that my grandparents never did. I know the reasons why my grandmother never took my grandfather in and, you know, had him sanctioned, even not even just to the Kingdom Hall, but to the authorities, because she was so conditioned and mind controlled by the Jehovah Witness community. But my mother, you know, from all the stories that I've heard, my mother definitely manifested how she was treated from the time she was young. Why didn't my grandmother ever do anything and take her to a therapist? I'm guessing that because she was completely conditioned that she just needs to pray to Jehovah. Again, the supernatural, to deal with something that actually needs a real world solution. And that's a part of the problem of being in a cult, because you're not actually addressing the issue. It doesn't go away. You can pray all you want. If there's actually something truly wrong with you, you have to address it. I think again that I've talked about when my mother had her breakdown and we had to take her to the hospital and stuff like that, and she was truly diagnosed. But I wanted to talk about something that happened to me when I was 11 years old. So my stepfather was mentally ill. So my mother, and I discussed this in one of my earlier videos, that my mother was dealing with the fact that my father had basically left her, married his mistress, and this was like an ongoing thing where my father had, you know, he had joined the military. My mother had decided that she was going to move with him and take us down, and she found when she went to base that my father had his mistress living on base with her 2 sons. And my mother actually had a nervous breakdown. That's really not a clinical term, but she had a break. She had a psychotic break when this happened. And I don't think she ever truly recovered from that, but I think that she actually went on and tried to do the best that she could. She was functional. So my grandparents, my aunts and uncle, everyone rallied around her, but she still, again, had emotional issues from time to time. But she went to work. She tried to take care of herself the best that she could. But she was completely devastated when my father married his mistress after all of that. And, you know, having to get a divorce. She's going to the Kingdom Hall, and the first person that shows her a little bit of attention, she jumps on that. Unfortunately, she did not know that this man was severely mentally ill. Now, what I don't want to do is go into some of the things that I found out later in life, but I have talked to his psychiatrist, and I have talked to his therapist. As an adult, I was able to have some pretty interesting conversations, because after I left and my older brother left, my entire family, my mother and stepfather and my 2 younger brothers, they had a family of therapists. They were in a group. And so I would call occasionally because there were times when my mother was having such psychiatric issues that and she was directing them specifically to me, that I could not talk with her, because it was just too much going on there. But I would occasionally call her, the family therapist. They had a head therapist, and I found out some things about my stepfather that I did not actually know. So he had some severe issues. Again, it does not surprise me that he was actually attracted to the Jehovah Witness cult. It actually appealed to his obsessive compulsive behavior and his using the supernatural to explain away his delusions. And again, this is not specific to my mother and stepfather. I actually came across these issues, and a lot of people, even when I was growing up. So the one situation that I wanted to talk about was a time when I actually got disfellowship from my family. And this is just to highlight the mental illness that goes on in a Jehovah Witness religion. But also what I wanted to do was to just talk about how some of the behaviors that go on in the Jehovah Witness religion manifest, and how people actually live and interact outside of the Jehovah Witness religion. And that's a separate video, but I think that's very dangerous. So a lot of the shunning and other things that are instituted in the Jehovah Witness religion, people start using it in other areas of their lives. So disfellowshipping is supposed to be specifically for a discipline that Jehovah Witnesses do to baptize witnesses. But my stepfather decided that he was going to institute this behavior in the household. I wasn't baptized. I was 11 years old. And because of something that happened in the Kingdom Hall, my stepfather didn't like, my mother didn't like how I acted. My stepfather didn't like it. So they decided that they were going to be cruel and inhumane and disfellowship me. So the short version of this story is that there was a group of kids that were Jehovah Witnesses, and we all went to middle school together. And I was a rambunctious, kid. I was 11. I like to have fun. I realized by that time that there was something kind of not right about my mother and my stepfather. But I was, very happy-go-lucky and, really enjoyed life and didn't have a problem making friends at all. And so there was this one kid that we used to mess with. He used to mess with us. We used to mess with him. So in one class, I was writing a note, and I said something funny about this guy, like I don't like him, he has a big head or something. Now this kid was a Jehovah Witness. He was part of a group of Jehovah Witnesses, and we all talked with each other. So I threw the note to someone else in the class. I can't remember if they were Jehovah Witness or not, but it was just, things that we did. The kid actually intercepted the note, and he gave it to his mother, and the mother took it to the elders. Now, again, as an adult, with kids, it doesn't make sense to exaggerate a situation like this. But in the Jehovah Witness religion, that's what they do. They will take a small situation and you're meeting with elders. So the mother felt that the kids were not getting along with her son, or that she was just having issues. So she took the note to the elders, and then they told us that we were going to have a meeting with them the next week. So all the kids got together. We were scared out of our wits. We didn't know what was going to happen. So we actually, amongst ourselves, talked it out and said, look, this isn't that big of a deal. I told him, I was just joking around. I think we're good. Because we didn't want to get in any trouble with any of the elders in the Kingdom Hall. So the next week, they had the meeting, and my mother was a wreck. I mean, she has some other things going on with this congregation. And my mother and I had started to get into it because my mother just started being very irrational. She started going through my things when I would go home, when I would go to school. My mother would go through my stuff, and she would look for any and everything that she felt was talking against her. And I was just like, my mother was just super paranoid, and that was because my stepfather was super paranoid. So she had found a note that I had sent, and I don't even remember what it was. It was so long ago. But she felt that I was making fun of Joe or something. I can't even remember, what it was, but it was crazy. And my mother, confronted me and said, what are you doing? And what are you doing when you go to school? And don't talk about the family and blah, blah, blah. So, I got a little tired of my mom harassing me every time I came in the house. And so we had an argument, and I told my mother that I hated her guts. Now, as an adult, I feel totally terrible about that. But, you sit around and ask parents, has your child ever said they hated you? And more than likely, they're going to say yes. But my mother, because she was not well, she just totally got upset about that. So I need to kind of bring that up because it actually comes into play when I tell this story. So we have the meeting, and we were hoping it would be a quick meeting. So the brother says a prayer, and he says, well, we've seen that the witness children are not getting along like we want. You're supposed to be examples when you go to school, and we found this note. And so we just wanted to kind of just, nobody's in trouble. He was actually quite nice. And he was like, but we wanted to kind of get together and make sure that we were treating each other in fellowship. And so he asked me about it. He asked the other kids about it. And we said, listen, we're good. We've talked about it. We're not angry. There's no issues to talk about. We're going to do better and try and support each other when we're in school. So we thought it was over. My mother gets up and starts screaming and hollering in this meeting. And she's like, that's not true. You need to tell the truth. And you know how they mistreat me and Joe and da-da-da. And I'm not using the right name here. So he's just da-da-da. So it was a trip. It was a trip. And I was looking at her like, you need to calm down, please. Let's I don't even know really how to explain it, but it was just, it was a trip. And the brother was like, sister so-and-so, please, what do you want us to say? And then my mother got really upset, and she was like, nobody's listening to me. Nobody's validating me. My daughter has told me she hated me. And I'm looking at her like, oh my goodness. And then my mom, I can't even make this up. She like freaks out, and she runs out of the meeting, and she gets in her car and she speeds off. And I'm sitting there like, did my mom just drop everything and like leave me? And so the Kingdom Hall was not close to where we lived. It wasn't like I could hop on a bus or anything. And I was sitting there like, this really isn't a big deal, but my mom made it this huge deal. And then on top of that, she left me at the Kingdom Hall. So and this is funny, the woman of the mother of the son who started this whole thing, where I wrote a note, said, "We will take you back to the house, don't worry." So they said a prayer and everybody was like smiling and happy, but I secretly did not know what was going to happen when I got back to the house, because at that point I realized that something was really wrong with my mother, and I didn't really know what was going to happen when I got back to the house. So the sister and her son, and we were laughing and giggling in the back of the car, took me back to the house. And I got out the car, and I remember walking up to the door, and I knocked on the door, and my stepfather answered the door. Yeah, he did. And he had a Bible in his hand, and he said, "You are disfellowshipped from this family. From this moment on, you will not associate with us in any real way." He was like, "You are to stay in your room unless you're eating or going to the bathroom." And I was like, "For what?" And he was like, Don't you speak back to me. I will punch you. I will hit you." I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is crazy. I didn't do anything." And he was like, "Your mother is in there falling apart because you did not support your mother, so you're disfellowship." I was like, okay. I walked up the steps, and I was like, I'm kind of good with this, because I really knew that there was something really wrong with my family. What I didn't like is the fact that they tried to stop me from interacting with my brothers. And I was, I was just like, this family is insane. But I was an avid reader, and I was, really enjoyed that. So it didn't affect me in that way. I think what did affect me is the fact that I was used to, going to the kitchen, sitting in different areas of the house, and it really forced me to just stay in my room. And I feel like that part of it stayed with me for a long time. And it was something that I never thought of. This has been many, many, many years ago, decades and decades ago. But the effects of being psychologically abused and shunned in my family, and it was only over a difference of opinion on a set of events. So this is how mass delusion works. I don't agree with shunning. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, and I don't think that it's done correctly in the Jehovah Witness religion in the context of baptized witnesses. But I'm not the only case of hearing people that had family that was delusional, family that had mental illness, and actually disfellowshipped their children simply because they felt that they had done something wrong. So it's actually taking a harmful practice and instituting it in your family. And these are cases of mental illness that go on in the Jehovah Witness religion, because you're already being instructed to do things that are psychologically harmful. And, I didn't think about that for a long time, but as I was thinking about how I wanted to talk about some of the mental health issues that I know go on in the Jehovah Witness community, I wanted to talk about something that happened to me. Now, I didn't tell people in my family right away, but when they found out, it was terrible. My aunt especially lost it on my mother. I never forget her finding out and screaming and hollering. She even threatened to take my brother and I, away from my mom. My father, when he found out, he was very angry. But, then it became a situation of, well, I have custody of the children. And, and then my mom bringing up a lot of things that didn't have anything to do with it. So my father just said, well, when she's with me, I'm not doing this. I don't agree with it. It doesn't even make sense because I still don't even know what it is that she did wrong. And so, that's really my anecdotal story, but it's sort of, I want to tie it all together by saying that what people need to understand about the mental health crisis in the Jehovah's Witness community is that it is instituted by mass delusion. I listen to some of the people on the governing body, and I get such a bad feeling because, again, I don't have my DSM in front of me. I can't say 100% what their issues are, but I would say that probably a good portion of them have some types of mental illness. You don't even have to be trained. If you actually listen to them, they're saying things that don't make any sense. And what they're doing is they're instituting that type of delusional thinking into the masses by having these videos. To do a comparative analysis, I would say listen to some of the Jim Jones cult. Listen to some of the other groups of cults where they talked about things that they had no basis for it. And, I've talked about that in my new light video and saying, listen, if someone keeps changing the mark, if someone keeps making statements that they have to keep correcting, at some point a light bulb should go off where you say, this person really doesn't know what they're talking about. They're asking you to detach from logic, detach from reason, and then just believe them. And they're saying it so conclusively that, again, this is the type of groupthink that needs to be monitored. You need to be aware of how this can cause you to think irrationally and then to behave irrationally. And again, I can talk about this. If anyone's interested, I think a great movie is the Bird That Flew Over the Cuckoo Nest. I think that's a great thing to read because you get to understand how you can be sane until you're in a situation where people are asking you to do things that are not sane, and how you can sometimes do that just because you're in a group. There is help, and there is a community of people that actually care. There are actually a few Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, that have actually gone into the mental health field and have actually written books. I'm going to try and add some links so that people can actually find those books and read those books so that they do know, hey, there are some things out there that can help you. But as I say, I definitely wanted to talk about this subject, but I at the end of it is, what do I want to say? And that is that you're not alone. Having a mental health issue does not mean that you're a bad person. But what you do need to do is you need to get the help. And you're not going to get that help in the Jehovah's Witness cult because they're not qualified. They don't have any social service arm, unlike other communities. So if you keep going to the elders because you're depressed, because you don't feel well, because you're having delusions, because you are doing things that you know are not right, you don't go to the scriptures. The scriptures are for certain things, but when you have these issues, you need to go to the proper people. You need to go see a therapist, see a psychologist, find someone that can help you feel better about yourself. So again, I appreciate people listening to my video. Again, what I want to do is I want to help people to know that you're not alone. And once you wake up and once you start realizing that there is help out there, there is help for you. You can start to change your life. You can start changing your world. You can take control of your life outside of the groupthink. And I think that's when you begin to live. So thank you very much for listening to my video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.